He built an empire on silence and fear. He buried every weakness. He erased every name that ever made him soft, except one. For 10 years, Jae-min Kwon, the most feared mafia boss in Seoul, told himself she was a traitor, that she took the money and walked away. But tonight, holding a document that proves everything he believed was a lie, the silent dragon is not angry. He is shattered. Because somewhere in Houston, Texas, a little girl has been collecting newspaper photographs of a father she has never met, and she is running out of time. Stay with me until the very end, and drop a like. Then comment the name of the city where you are watching so I can see how far this story has traveled. The rain came down hard over Seoul that night, the kind of rain that made the city look like it was dissolving from the top down. Neon signs bled into the wet pavement. Taxis moved in slow, indifferent lines. 11 floors above Gangnam-gu, inside a penthouse that cost more than most men earned in 3 lifetimes, Jae-min Kwon sat alone at a mahogany desk and opened a box he had not touched in a decade. He was not a sentimental man. He did not keep photographs. He did not own anything that carried memory on purpose. The men who worked under him called him the Silent Dragon. Not because he was quiet, though he was, but because when he moved, things burned. Businesses collapsed. Rivals disappeared into administrative paperwork that no attorney ever successfully unwound. He had built the Kwon organization from a mid-tier criminal syndicate into the most structurally efficient underground network in South Korea, and he had done it before he was 35. He was 41 now, with the kind of stillness around him that people mistook for peace. It was not peace. It was the absence of anything left to feel. The box was cardboard, water-warped at the corners, the kind of thing a moving company would throw out. It had come from the estate records of his grandmother's secondary property in Incheon, a house the family used for meetings they did not want documented. His grandmother, Kwon Mi-suk, had suffered a minor stroke 3 weeks ago. While her personal staff was reorganizing her affairs, a junior accountant named Park had found a storage room with filing cabinets that did not appear in any official inventory. Park had been thorough enough to digitize everything and send the files to Jae-min's private server. Loyal, efficient, no idea what he had just detonated. Jae-min had been reviewing the files for 6 days. Most of it was old operational material, vendor contracts, political donation records, the usual cartography of influence. But on the 4th day, buried inside a subfolder labeled with a date from 10 years ago, he found a name he had not allowed himself to say out loud in a decade. Brooks. Aaliyah Brooks. He had sat very still for a long time after that. Now, at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, he was reading the original documents, not the versions his family had shown him, the originals. Wire transfer records that had been doctored. A legal agreement bearing her signature that his grandmother's lawyers had fabricated using a notary who no longer existed. A series of handwritten notes, his grandmother's elegant script, unmistakable, detailing the exact sequence of how the operation had been managed. They had done it cleanly, professionally, the way the Kwon family did everything. Aaliyah had not taken the money. She had never agreed to leave. She had been 23 years old, living in a country where she knew almost no one, and his grandmother had sent 2 men to her apartment, not to threaten her physically. That was not how Kwon Mi-suk operated. She had sent a lawyer and a woman she employed as a financial advisor, and they had sat across from Aaliyah and told her, calmly, over green tea, that Jae-min had already agreed to the separation, that he had accepted a settlement to dissolve the relationship because the family had determined she was not suitable, that there was money available to her if she signed the paperwork and left Korea within 72 hours. Aaliyah had not signed, so they showed her other documents, fabricated financial records suggesting that Jae-min had been negotiating the separation behind her back for months. They made it look like he had already taken money from a secondary account the family maintained for exactly this kind of situation. They told her the relationship had been a calculation from the beginning, that she had been naive, that she had mistaken tolerance for love. And then, this was the part that made Jae-min's hand stop moving on the desk, they told her she was pregnant before she had told him. His grandmother had known. She had sources inside the private clinic Aaliyah had visited. She had known before Aaliyah had worked up the courage to say the words to Jae-min herself. and she had used that knowledge as the final instrument. They told Aaliyah that if she stayed, the child's existence would be used to force a legal battle that would strip her of parental rights within a Korean court system the Kwon family had operated inside for 30 years. They told her she would lose. They told her the only way to protect the child was to leave, to disappear, and to never contact Jaemin Kwon again. She had left within 48 hours. Jaemin stood up from the desk. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city. He pressed one hand flat against the cold glass and breathed. Slow, deliberate. The technique his first lieutenant had taught him 20 years ago, when Jaemin was a young man learning how not to let rage make him stupid. It was not working tonight. He had believed them. That was the part he could not get past. He had been 29 years old, already ruthless, already operating on the premise that everyone had a price. When his family came to him with the documents showing Aaliyah's supposed acceptance of the settlement, he had felt the betrayal hit him like a structural failure, something fundamental in him collapsing all at once. He had looked at those papers, at what appeared to be her signature, and he had decided in the space of 3 seconds that he had been a fool, that he had allowed himself to feel something for a woman who had seen him as a transaction. He had not cried. He had not called her. He had not asked for an explanation, because he told himself that a man who needed an explanation was a man who already knew the answer and was simply stalling. He had simply closed that part of himself and gone back to work. 41 years old, a decade of running an empire with surgical precision. No relationships that lasted longer than 8 weeks, because 8 weeks was approximately how long it took a woman to start wanting something from him that he no longer had to give. No close friendships. His 2 most trusted lieutenants, Han and Cho, knew him well enough not to ask personal questions. His father maintained the public legitimacy of their business holdings and occasionally sent messages reminding Jaemin that the family's reputation required a respectable marriage. Jaemin had never responded to those messages. He picked up his phone. He called his head of information security, a man named Seo, who answered on the second ring regardless of the hour. Aaliyah Brooks, Jaemin said. American national, Houston, Texas, last known. She may be operating under a different name. I need a current address, a business registration, and whatever public digital footprint exists. You have 12 hours. Seo did not ask why. Understood. Jaemin ended the call and stood in the window for another hour, watching the rain. Seo came back in 9. Aaliyah Carter. The name change had been legal, processed through a Texas court 4 months after she returned to the United States. She had gone back to her mother's city and built something from nothing. Aaliyah Carter Events and Hospitality, incorporated 8 years ago, had grown into one of the more respected mid-sized event production companies in Houston. Corporate clients, high-end private functions, a staff of 22, according to the business registration, a reputation for flawless execution, and a principal who was, by all accounts, difficult to get personal access to. There were photographs in the business directory listing, a professional headshot. Jaemin looked at it for a long time. She had changed the way time changes people when they have been doing something hard. Her face was the same geometry he had memorized at 29 and spent 11 years pretending to forget. But there was a set to her jaw now, a directness in her eyes that had not been there before. She had become someone who did not require permission to take up space. He kept reading. The deeper file Seo had compiled, the one that went beyond public records, included an enrollment entry from a Houston private school. A student named Zara Carter, age 9, registered to a parent listed as Aaliyah Carter, 9 years old. Jaemin was very good at mathematics. He sat with that number for a long time. 9. Which meant Aaliyah had been pregnant when they separated, which meant his grandmother had known, which meant the child existed, had always existed, had been existing for 9 years in Houston, Texas without him, and somewhere in the accumulated architecture of his adult life. Every decision, every acquisition, every calculated move that had built the Kwon organization into what it was, there was a child who was half him, and he had not known, and she had been 9 years old long enough that she was already somebody. He called his travel coordinator at 6 in the morning. Book a flight to Houston. Private. I need departure by tonight. Shall I notify Mr. Hunt? No. He landed in Houston 13 hours later. 1. The city hit him differently than he expected. He had been to New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. American cities with the kind of compressed intensity that felt familiar. Houston was sprawling and flat and hot in a way that felt almost aggressive, the sky enormous and pale above freeways that went on longer than seemed reasonable. His car service drove him through neighborhoods that shifted from glass towers to bungalows inside of 3 blocks. The city had no obvious logic to it. It had simply grown in whatever direction it wanted, and the people in it seemed entirely fine with that. He checked into a hotel under a subsidiary company name. He did not use the penthouse suite his coordinator had automatically booked. He took a corner room on the 14th floor with a view of downtown and a bathroom counter where he set up his laptop and read everything CO had sent again, more slowly this time. Aaliyah's company had a contract event scheduled for the following morning. A corporate hospitality function at the Meridian Hotel, one of the larger luxury properties downtown. Jae-min had already identified 3 Kwan organization subsidiaries that maintained accounts with the Meridian Group. It was a minor connection, but minor connections were all he had needed before. He did not sleep. At 8 in the morning, he showered, put on a dark suit, and went downstairs. He ate breakfast without tasting it. He drank 2 cups of black coffee and watched the hotel entrance from a table near the window while the morning traffic moved outside. At 9:45, he walked to the Meridian. He had not thought clearly about what he was going to say. That was unusual for him. Jae-min Kwan did not enter situations without a strategy. He did not have conversations without knowing his objective and his fallback position. He had given depositions to international regulatory bodies without notes. He had negotiated with men who had firearms on the table without his voice changing register. But he walked through the Meridian lobby without a plan, and that told him something about what was happening inside his chest that he was not prepared to examine directly. The hospitality event was in the Meridian's 3rd-floor ballroom. He could see the setup through the open door. Round tables with white linens, staff in black moving efficiently around the perimeter, a small staging area being adjusted at the front. He stood near the corridor entrance and watched. He was looking for her. He found her 3 minutes later. She came through a service door at the back carrying a tablet, speaking to a man with a headset who was nodding and making notes. She was dressed simply, dark blazer, structured trousers, hair pulled back, and she moved through the space like someone who had been doing this long enough that efficiency had become instinct. She touched a table arrangement and adjusted it slightly. She said something to a young woman arranging floral centerpieces, and the woman immediately changed her approach. She did it without raising her voice, without stopping walking. Jae-min stood in the corridor entrance and understood completely why he had spent 11 years unable to replace her. She turned, and she saw him. He watched the recognition happen in real time. It traveled through her face like a current. First confusion, then identification, then something that was not exactly fear but was adjacent to it. The specific expression of a person who has been living carefully and has just seen a variable they had assumed was permanently removed appear without warning in their controlled environment. She held the tablet against her chest and said something quiet to the man beside her. He nodded and walked away. She stood very still for 4 seconds. Then she walked toward the service door she had come through and pushed it open and went through it. Jae-min moved. He crossed the ballroom quickly, not running, and pushed through the service door into a corridor that smelled like carpet cleaner and industrial food service. He could hear her ahead. Footsteps on linoleum, moving fast. He followed. She went through a stairwell door and he caught it before it closed. She was 2 flights below him already, moving down toward the parking structure. He called her name. His voice echoed in the concrete stairwell, and she didn't stop. He caught up to her in the parking garage on the first sublevel, near a row of white vans with her company's logo on the side. "Aaliyah!" She stopped. Her back was to him. She had both hands at her sides, and he could see from the tension across her shoulders that she was working very hard to control her breathing. She turned around. "How did you find me?" It was not a question. It was an accusation. "The business registration is public," he said. "That's not what I asked." Her voice was even, flat. the voice of someone who had been preparing for this moment and was now furious at themselves for not having prepared better. How did you know to look? I found documents in my grandmother's estate records. Something moved in her face, quick, controlled. What kind of documents? The kind that explain everything, he said. The transfer records, the legal agreement they made you believe I had signed, the notary documentation, all of it, Aaliyah. I have all of it. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. You should leave, she said. I'm not leaving. Jamin. Her voice fractured slightly on his name, the first evidence that the evenness was costing her something. Whatever you found, whatever you think you know, it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the last 10 years. I know it doesn't, he said. I'm not here to undo it. I can't undo it. I'm here because I needed you to know that I didn't know, that I believed them, that I was wrong to believe them, and I spent 10 years being wrong, and I'm here now because I have to say that to your face. That's not enough, she said immediately. I know. You don't get to show up 11 years later with an explanation and expect that to count for something. I don't expect anything, he said. I came here to find you. I didn't know what I was going to say. I still don't. But I needed to tell you the truth, and I needed to hear whatever you have to say to me, and after that I will do whatever you need me to do. She shook her head. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were wet, and she looked like a woman who was exhausted from carrying something for a very long time and was not willing to put it down in front of the person who had made it heavy. She said, You need to go. And then, from somewhere beyond the concrete pillar to his left, came the sound of small feet running on pavement, and a voice that Jamin had never heard before in his life, but that hit him somewhere behind the sternum like a physical impact. Mommy, Ms. Diane said, I can wait with you, but I need to stay close. A child rounded the pillar, small, maybe 4 feet tall, wearing a school uniform with one sock slightly lower than the other and a backpack that was almost as big as she was. She ran directly to Aaliyah and grabbed her hand without looking up. Then she looked up. She looked at Jamin, and Jamin looked at her eyes, his own eyes, the same dark, precise shape his grandmother had once told him were the truest Quan feature, and felt the floor of the parking garage shift slightly beneath him. Aaliyah's hand tightened around the child's. The girl tilted her head to one side. She looked at him the way children look at things that are interesting and new, without the protective wariness that adults develop. She looked at his face very carefully, the way someone looks at a photograph they have seen before and are now comparing to the original. She said, Are you Korean? Jamin could not speak. The child looked between him and her mother. She looked back at him. And in the particular serious expression on her small face, in the set of her jaw and the stillness of her, Jamin felt something inside him tear open all the way down. Mommy, the girl said slowly, he looks like the man in my book. Aaliyah closed her eyes. Her hand was shaking now, very slightly, against her daughter's. Jamin stood in the underground garage of a hotel in Houston, Texas, with the smell of concrete and motor oil around him, and looked at the child who had collected photographs of him from magazines without knowing why, and understood for the first time in 11 years exactly what he had lost. And from somewhere in the building above them, both of their phones buzzed at the same time. A message from Aaliyah's assistant marked urgent, and a call from Jamin's head of security in Seoul, and neither of them moved because the world above that parking garage had suddenly become completely irrelevant. The child's name was Zara. Jamin did not learn it in that parking garage. He learned it 40 minutes later, sitting at a small table in the hotel's ground floor cafe, because Aaliyah had nowhere else to take him that would not involve her staff watching, and the child had to be somewhere, and Zara had looked at her mother with those patient, serious eyes and said she was hungry, and that had been the only thing in that entire situation that required an immediate answer. Aaliyah ordered her a sandwich and a juice and did not look at Jamin while she did it. Zara sat across from him and studied him with the focused attention of someone conducting research. You were in my book, she said. It was not a question. I don't know what book, Jamin said. I'll show you sometime. She picked up her juice. Maybe. Aaliyah sat beside her daughter with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup she had not touched. She was looking at the table. Her jaw was doing the thing Jamin had noticed in the garage. A small, almost imperceptible tension, the kind of muscular control that people develop when they have spent years not allowing themselves to react in front of others. Zara, Aaliyah said quietly, finish your lunch. I am finishing it. Quietly. Zara looked at her mother, then at Jaimin, then back at her sandwich. She ate with the careful deliberateness of a child who understood that the adults at the table were doing something complicated and had decided to give them space for it without being asked. That kind of social intelligence in a 9-year-old was not something you saw often. Jamin recognized it because he had developed the same skill at approximately the same age, sitting at his grandfather's dinner table listening to conversations that went silent when he entered the room. He looked at Aaliyah. Tell me about her, he said. No. Aaliyah, not here. She lifted her coffee cup, set it down without drinking. Not like this. Not in a hotel cafe with her sitting right there and you showing up without warning after 11 years and expecting me to... She stopped, pressed her lips together. No. Then when? I don't know if there is a when. She's my daughter. The words landed on the table between them like something dropped from a height. Zara looked up, her eyes moved between them. She went back to her sandwich. Aaliyah's voice dropped to a register that was barely above silence. You do not get to say that to me like it's a claim. You don't get to walk in here and use that word and expect it to mean the same thing it means for me. You were not there. For 9 years you were not there, and I was. I didn't know. I know you didn't know. Her voice was still low, still controlled, and the control was the most frightening thing about it. That's not the same as it not being true. Jamin said nothing, because she was right and he knew it, and the only thing worse than being wrong was understanding exactly the shape and weight of your wrongness with perfect clarity. Zara finished her sandwich. She looked at Jamin directly. Are you going to be around for a while? Jamin looked at her. Yes, he said. Aaliyah exhaled through her nose. Okay, Zara said. She seemed to accept this as simple information. She folded her napkin the way someone had clearly taught her to, placed it beside her plate, and looked at her mother. Can I go see if Ms. Diane is still upstairs? Aaliyah hesitated for one beat. Stay in the ballroom. Don't go anywhere else. I know, Mom. Zara slid off her chair. She looked at Jamin one more time before she left, that same careful, measuring look, and then she walked away toward the elevator bank with her backpack bouncing. They sat in silence for 30 seconds after she was gone. She has a heart condition, Aaliyah said. Jamin went still. She was diagnosed 14 months ago. It's a structural defect. She was born with it. It just didn't present clinically until she was 8. Aaliyah was looking at the table again, speaking in the flat, informational tone of someone who had said these words many times and had learned to remove the bottom out of them so they didn't drop her every time. It's called a ventricular septal defect. There's a hole in the wall between the 2 lower chambers of her heart. For a while, the cardiologist said we could manage it with medication, but she's been declining. The most recent evaluation put her in a category where surgery is no longer optional. What kind of surgery? Open heart. The cafe noise continued around them. Someone at the next table laughed at something on their phone. Outside the window, a delivery truck was backing up, beeping in short intervals. When? Jamin said. The surgical team wants to schedule within the next 6 to 8 weeks. There's a pediatric cardiac surgeon at Texas Medical Center, Dr. Reeves, who has one of the best outcomes records in the country for this procedure in children her age. The wait list is long. We're on it. She finally looked at him. I have insurance. I have savings. I've been managing this. I want to help. I know you do. Aaliyah, I said I know. Her voice was sharp for the first time. Do you understand what it means for me to sit here and tell you that my daughter, our daughter, needs surgery? Do you understand what it costs me to have this conversation with you, specifically, after everything? She shook her head once. I am not going to fall apart in a hotel cafe. I'm not going to do it. But I need you to understand that what you want to do and what I need are 2 completely different things. And right now I don't have any capacity to figure out where those 2 things might overlap. Then tell me what you need. Time, she said, and space, and for you to not be here without warning. I can give you 2 of those. She looked at him. "I'm not leaving Houston," he said. Her expression shifted into something that was tired in a specific way, the tiredness of someone who had expected exactly this and was not surprised but had been hoping to be wrong. She picked up her bag from the back of her chair. She stood up. "I have an event to finish running," she said. "Don't come back here." She walked toward the elevator without looking back. Jaemin sat at the cafe table and drank his cold coffee and watched a city he did not know move past the window and tried to do the mathematics of what came next. He called Han from his hotel room that afternoon. Han Seung-woo had been with him for 14 years. He was not a warm man, Han, but he was a precise one, and he was the only person in Jaemin's organization who was permitted to ask clarifying questions. He listened to Jaemin's summary without interrupting. When Jaemin finished, there was a brief silence. "The child is confirmed as yours. She's 9 years old, and she has my face, Han. I'm asking for logistical certainty. If you're making decisions based on this, I'm not making decisions. I'm telling you where I am and why, and I'm telling you that I will be here for the foreseeable future. You'll manage Seoul operations directly. Anything that requires my signature goes through the encrypted channel. Anything that requires my physical presence can wait or be resolved by you." Another brief silence. "Your father has been asking about your schedule. Tell him I'm managing an acquisition. He'll want specifics. Then tell him I'll call him when I have them." Jaemin ended the call. He did not call his father. His father called him at 7 that evening. Kwon Dae-jung was 67 years old and had the voice of a man who had spent his entire adult life in rooms where other people were required to listen to him. He spoke in Korean, which Jaemin answered in kind. The conversation moved quickly through the surface. Some concerns about the Incheon expansion, a regulatory issue with one of their subsidiary communications companies, and then his father arrived at the actual subject. "You're in America." "Yes." "Han told me you're managing an acquisition." "I am." "Han also told me you went alone, without a security detail, without notifying anyone." A pause. "That's not an acquisition, Jaemin. That's personal." Jaemin stood at his hotel room window in the gathering Houston dark. The city was lighting up below him, freeways going red and white with tail lights and headlights, the kind of organized movement that looked from above like a circulatory system. "I found documents in grandmother's estate files," he said. Silence. "I know what was done to Aaliyah Brooks," Jaemin said. "I know what grandmother did. I know what was used against her. And I know about the child." His father's voice, when it came back, was careful in a way that told Jaemin everything. "That was a long time ago. It was 9 years ago. She's been raising my daughter alone for 9 years. Jaemin, did you know?" The pause was long enough to be its own answer. "You knew," Jaemin said. "Your grandmother believed she was protecting—" "Did you know about the child?" A longer pause. "Your grandmother mentioned the pregnancy. At the time, the decision had already been made. We thought—" "You thought what?" His voice had not changed register. That was the thing about training yourself not to react. Sometimes the stillness was more frightening than anger would have been. "Tell me what you thought, Father. I want to hear the specific sentence." "We thought it was better this way." Jaemin pressed his free hand flat against the window. The glass was cool. Outside, Houston continued to exist, indifferent and enormous. "I'm going to stay here," Jaemin said. "I'm going to find a way to be part of my daughter's life, and I'm going to do whatever Aaliyah needs me to do to make that possible. Whatever you and grandmother think about that is not my concern anymore." "You're talking about abandoning the organization. I'm talking about my daughter, who needs heart surgery, who is 9 years old and has been collecting newspaper photographs of me because she didn't know what else to do with the information that her father existed but wasn't there." His voice was completely level. "Don't call me about this again unless you're calling to apologize." He hung up. He stood at the window for a long time after that. Thoughts. 3 days passed before Aaliyah answered his text message. He had kept it simple. "I'd like to meet Zara properly. On your terms, your timeline, your location. I will wait as long as you need." She replied on the third day, Thursday, 4 p.m., Riverside Park. "Come alone and don't dress like that." He did not know what "like that" meant precisely, but he assumed it referred to the suit. He arrived Thursday in dark trousers and a plain shirt, no tie, and sat on a bench near the duck pond at 4 o'clock exactly. Aaliyah arrived at 4:07 with Zara beside her. The child was in a different school uniform, different school, different day, and she was carrying something under her arm that looked like a binder. She sat down next to Jamin without any preamble and put the binder on her knees. It was a scrapbook, handmade, the cover decorated with careful lettering and what appeared to be printed images laminated and glued to cardstock. She opened it without ceremony and turned it to face him. The first page had a photograph from what Jamin recognized as a Korean business magazine from 7 years ago, a profile piece on emerging power in the Kwan organization. The photograph was a formal one, him in a suit at a press event, half turned from the camera. Zara pointed at it. "That's the first one I found. I was 6. My friend Priya's mom was reading a magazine and I saw your face and I thought you looked like me." Jamin looked at the photograph. He looked at the child. He said nothing because there was nothing to say that would not be inadequate. "I didn't know who you were," she continued. She didn't talk about you, so I did research." She said this with complete seriousness, as though research were a natural response available to 6-year-olds. "I found more pictures. I put them in here. I kept finding new ones." She turned a few pages. Korean financial publications, an international business news photograph, what appeared to be a cropped image from a social media post of a public event. Each one was labeled in careful child's handwriting with the date she had found it. "I didn't show Mom for a long time. I thought she might be sad." Aaliyah was sitting on Zara's other side, looking at the duck pond. Her profile was still and controlled, and Jamin could see the effort it was taking. "I'm not angry at you," Zara said. She said it conversationally, the way a child states a fact that seems obvious but might need confirming. "I know you didn't know about me." Mom explained it. She said it was complicated. She looked at him. "Was it complicated?" "Yes," he said. "Okay." She turned another page. There were a dozen photographs on this one, arranged chronologically. "I'm going to need surgery soon," she said. "For my heart." "Did Mom tell you?" "She did." "I'm not that scared." She considered this. "I'm a little scared, but Dr. Reeves said she's done it lots of times." She looked at the photographs. "I thought maybe if I could meet you before the surgery, it would be good. In case." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The specific weight of those 2 words, "in case," landed on Jamin with a force that had nothing to do with his chest and everything to do with it. He said, "I'm going to be here, before and after." She looked at him. "Promise?" "Yes," he said. "I promise." Zara nodded once, as though this settled the matter administratively, and turned to the next page of her scrapbook. Aaliyah stood up abruptly. "I need a minute," she said, to no one in particular, and walked 20 feet down the path toward the water and stopped there with her back to both of them. Min watched her. He could see from the movement of her shoulders that she was breathing through something she did not want either of them to witness. He did not go after her. He stayed with Zara, who had moved on to explaining which photograph had been the hardest to find and why, and let Aaliyah have the 20 feet and the view of the water and the privacy of her own grief. When she came back, her eyes were dry and her jaw was set, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who has made a decision she is not entirely comfortable with and has decided to commit to it anyway. "You can see her," she said. "Structured visits, my schedule, my rules, my locations. You don't show up unannounced. You don't make her promises you can't keep. You don't tell her anything about your life in Seoul without talking to me first." "Agreed," he said immediately. "I'm not forgiving you," she said. "That's not what this is." "I know. I'm doing this for her, not for you." "I understand." She looked at him for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for in his face, she either found it or decided the search was over. "Thursday next week, same time." She held out her hand to Zara. "Come on, baby." Zara took her mother's hand. She looked back at Jamin over her shoulder as they walked away. She raised her free hand in a small, solemn wave. He raised his hand back. He sat on the park bench for a long time after they were gone, watching the ducks move across the water and tried to understand how a person was supposed to hold the weight of 9 years of absence inside a single afternoon. Ijekat. On Friday evening, Jae-min's phone rang with a sole number he recognized as belonging to his grandmother's private line. She had not called him directly in 4 years. He answered. Her voice was older than he remembered. The stroke had taken something from it, a firmness that had always been its defining quality. She sounded like a woman who was speaking carefully because she was no longer entirely certain of her ground. "You've been to see her," Kwon Mi-suk said. "Yes." "And the child?" "Her name is Zara." A long silence. "Your father tells me you intend to stay." "I do." "Jae-min." Her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but different, more deliberate. "What I did for the family. I want you to understand that." "I understand that you believe that," he said. "She was not suitable." "Do not," he said, "say that to me." The silence stretched. "I found all of it," he said. "The fabricated documents, the legal records, the notes in your handwriting detailing how you managed the separation. I know what you told her. I know what you threatened her with. I know that you knew she was pregnant and used it." His voice remained completely even. "I am not going to have a conversation with you about whether what you did was justified. I am telling you that I know, and that I am staying, and that you will have to decide what kind of relationship you want to have with me going forward with that knowledge between us." Another silence. When she spoke again, something in her voice was different in a way Jae-min could not immediately name. "She was just a girl," Kwon Mi-suk said very quietly. "Yes," Jae-min said. "She was." He ended the call. He set the phone face down on the hotel room desk and sat in the chair beside it, and did not move for a long time. He did not know what his grandmother had meant by those last words, whether it was Aaliyah she was referring to, or the child, or perhaps herself a long time ago, in a circumstance no one had ever told him about. He did not know if it mattered. What he knew was that the following Thursday, he would sit in a park in Houston, Texas, and a small girl with his eyes would show him photographs she had collected because she had not known what else to do with the knowledge that he existed. And the Thursday after that, and the one after that, and he would be present for the surgery because she had asked him in that clear-eyed, careful way, in case, and no power in any organization he had ever built was going to move him from that position. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message from CO. Routine operational summary, Seoul. He turned it face down again and did not read it. And then his phone rang with a number he did not recognize, a Houston area code. And when he answered, the voice on the other end was not Aaliyah, but a woman who identified herself as Aaliyah's assistant, and her voice was tight with the specific controlled panic of someone delivering news they had been told to deliver calmly. "Mr. Kwon, I'm sorry to call you directly. Ms. Carter gave me your number for emergencies. Zara was admitted to Texas Medical Center about an hour ago. Her condition deteriorated this afternoon. They're saying the surgery can't wait 6 weeks." Jae-min was already standing. "They're scheduling it for Monday," the assistant said. "Ms. Carter thought you should know. She said—" A brief pause, the sound of the woman composing herself. "She said she didn't want you to hear about it after." Jae-min grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "Tell her I'm on my way." He was out the door before the call ended, moving through a hotel corridor in Houston at 9 o'clock on a Friday night toward a hospital where his daughter was lying in a bed with a broken heart. And behind him, somewhere over the Pacific, the weight of everything he had built and everything he had destroyed was shifting in a way that would not shift back. The hospital smelled like cold air and industrial cleaner, and underneath both of those things, something antiseptic that coated the back of the throat and stayed there. Jae-min walked through the Texas Medical Center main entrance at 9:47 on a Friday night, moving at the pace of a man who did not intend to be stopped by anyone, and no one stopped him. He found Aaliyah in a waiting area on the 4th floor cardiac unit. She was sitting in a plastic chair against the wall with her coat still on and her bag in her lap, and her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup that was no longer warm. She looked up when he came through the corridor doors, and he saw the precise moment she registered that she was relieved he was there and hated herself slightly for it. He sat down beside her without speaking. She said, "They stabilized her," She's sleeping. They have her on a drip to regulate the arrhythmia. What happened? She collapsed at home. She said she felt dizzy after dinner, and then Aaliyah stopped. She pressed her lips together. She was conscious the whole time. She kept telling me she was fine. She kept saying, "Mom, I'm fine," like I was the one who needed calming down. Her voice did not break, but it came close to the edge and then pulled back by force of will. She's 9 years old and she was lying on the kitchen floor telling me not to panic. Gaiman looked at the floor. The linoleum was a pale institutional gray with a faint blue undertone, the kind of color chosen specifically because it implied cleanliness without implying anything else. "Dr. Reeves is coming in tomorrow morning," Aaliyah continued. "She wants to do a full imaging workup, and then she's going to give us a surgical timeline. She said possibly as early as Monday. She said we can't—" She stopped again. She said we're past the point where waiting is a reasonable option. "All right," Jamin said. "It's going to cost. I'm paying for it." "Jamin?" "Aaliyah." He turned to look at her directly. "Not as a negotiation, not as something you owe me anything for. She is my daughter, and she needs surgery, and I am paying for it. That is not a conversation." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see the complicated machinery of her pride working against the reality of the situation, and he watched her make the decision the way he had watched her make decisions in the hotel ballroom, efficiently, without performance. "Okay," she said. They sat in silence for a while. The fourth-floor cardiac unit at 9:50 on a Friday had the particular quiet of a place where serious things were happening behind closed doors, and the people in the hallways were moving with the careful purposefulness of those who understood that. "Can I see her?" Jamin said. Aaliyah was quiet for a moment. "She's sleeping." "I won't wake her." Another moment. She stood up and he followed her down the corridor to a room at the end where a nurse checked Aaliyah's visitor band and looked at Jamin with the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen every variety of complicated family situation and had opinions about none of them. The room was dim. The monitoring equipment made small, regular sounds. Zara was in the bed looking smaller than she had in the park, the way children look smaller in hospital beds than they do anywhere else, as though the scale of the equipment around them is doing something to perspective. She was asleep with her mouth slightly open and her hands loose at her sides and her backpack sitting on the chair in the corner, which meant someone had brought it from home and she had asked them to put it where she could see it. Jamin stood at the foot of the bed and looked at his daughter. He had been in rooms with dying men. He had made decisions that ended careers, dissolved fortunes, rearranged the structural geography of organizations built over decades. He had looked at things that were supposed to be frightening and processed them as problems requiring solutions. He was good at that. He had been good at it for 20 years. He was not good at this. He stood at the foot of his daughter's hospital bed and felt something behind his sternum that had no tactical application whatsoever, and he let it be there because there was nothing else he could do with it. He stayed for 10 minutes. He did not touch anything. He did not speak. When he left the room, he walked back to the waiting area and sat down and called CO and told him to identify every pediatric cardiac surgical specialist in the continental United States with a top-tier outcomes record in ventricular repair procedures in pediatric patients and have the list on his phone by 6 in the morning. Then he sat back in the plastic chair and stayed there. Aaliyah went home at midnight to sleep for a few hours. She made Jamin promise to call her if anything changed. He promised. He did not leave. He was still in the waiting area at 2 in the morning when a man sat down across from him. Jamin had not heard him approach, which was unusual. He was not a man who failed to hear people approach. He looked up and the man was already seated, mid-50s, Korean, in a suit that was expensive but not ostentatious, with the particular posture of someone accustomed to being in rooms where he had leverage. Jamin had never seen him before. "Mr. Kwan," the man said, in Korean. "My name is Lim Byung-chul. I apologize for the hour." Jamin looked at him without changing expression. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you're sitting across from me in a Houston hospital at 2 in the morning. I represent a consortium of Kwan organization partners in Seoul." Lim settled his jacket. You have been out of contact with your operations for nearly 2 weeks. There are concerns. I told Han to manage operations. Han Seong-woo is your lieutenant. He is not you. Lim's voice was carefully neutral, the voice of a man delivering information he has been paid to deliver without editorializing. There are specific negotiations in progress, the Encheon port expansion, the arrangement with the Busan Municipal Council, and the question of the Yongsan communications license. That require your personal authorization. Your partners are growing uncomfortable with the delay. They can remain uncomfortable for another few weeks. Mr. Kwan. Lim leaned forward slightly. I want to be clear that I am here as a courtesy. The consortium asked me to inform you in person. If you are unable to return to Seoul within the next 7 days, certain partners have indicated they may need to make independent decisions about the Incheon arrangement. Jae-min looked at him. Which partners? I'm not at liberty to... Lim. His voice was quiet and entirely without inflection. Which partners? Lim looked at him for a moment, recalculating something. Park Industries, the Shin family, and one of the Daejeon municipal contacts you've been cultivating for the licensing extension. Jae-min was quiet. These were not peripheral partners. Park Industries was the legitimate commercial anchor of 3 of the organization's most significant financial structures. The Shin family controlled port access through a subsidiary network that had taken 7 years to build. Losing them was not losing a negotiation. It was losing the architecture that held the legitimate face of the organization in place, the part that made everything else possible. Tell the consortium, Jae-min said, that I will be in contact with them directly, through Han, within 48 hours. They were hoping for your physical presence. That's not available. He looked at the man. You've delivered your message. You can go. Lim studied him for a moment, then stood, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the elevator without another word. Jae-min sat in the plastic chair in the cardiac unit waiting room and looked at the pale gray linoleum and understood that the thing he had been telling himself was a temporary situation was not, in fact, temporary. The organization was not a machine that could be left running unattended. It was an ecosystem that required him specifically, his decisions, his presence, his authority. And the people inside it had been patient for 2 weeks, and were beginning to move in the directions that people move when they sense that the authority above them has become unreliable. He stayed in the waiting room until morning. Dr. Reeves was a compact woman in her late 40s with close-cropped gray hair and the efficient manner of someone who had spent decades making complex information comprehensible to frightened people. She met with Aaliyah and Jae-min together at 8:30 Saturday morning in a small consultation room off the cardiac unit corridor. She did not appear surprised that there were 2 parents. She did not ask for explanation. She opened the imaging on the room's display screen and walked them through it with the directness of someone who respected the people across from her enough not to soften the architecture of the facts. The defect was larger than the previous imaging had indicated. The deterioration over the past 3 weeks had been faster than the projected rate. The arrhythmia episode the previous evening suggested the heart was compensating in ways that were no longer sustainable without intervention. We schedule Monday, Dr. Reeves said. The surgical team I want is available. The procedure will take between 4 and 6 hours depending on what we find once we're in. Pediatric open heart repair at her age and defect profile has a strong outcomes history. I want to be honest with you about the risk because I think you both deserve that. It is not without risk. The repair itself carries a standard surgical risk profile, and because of the arrhythmia presentation, we'll have a cardiac electrophysiology team on standby. She looked at them both steadily. She's healthy otherwise. She's strong. I've operated on children in significantly more compromised condition than Zara, and they are living completely normal lives. I want you to hold that. Aaliyah was writing in a small notebook. She had been writing since Dr. Reeves began speaking. Her handwriting was small and precise, each line close to the one above it, the handwriting of someone managing the volume of what they were receiving by containing it in organized form. Jae-min sat with his hands flat on the table and listened to every word and filed it with the same systematic attention he applied to every piece of information that mattered. But beneath the systematic attention, behind everything organized and controlled, was a frequency of fear he had not experienced since he was very young and had not known yet how to convert it into something useful. I want a second opinion, he said, not because I question your assessment, because she's 9 years old and this is her heart, and I want to know that we have confirmed this from every available source. Dr. Reeves looked at him. I'd recommend the same thing if she were mine, she said. I can connect you with Dr. Tanaka at Cleveland Clinic and Dr. Morrison in Boston. Both are peer level for this procedure. I'll have my office send the complete imaging and case file to both of them today. You can expect responses by Sunday. Thank you, Jamin said. Aaliyah was still writing. She wrote one more line and then she closed the notebook and she sat for a moment with both hands on the cover and her eyes down. Dr. Reeves left them alone in the consultation room. They sat there quietly for a minute. I called my mother last night, Aaliyah said. She's coming down from Dallas. She'll be here this afternoon. Jamin nodded. She doesn't know about you, Aaliyah said. I mean, she knows you exist. She knows the situation. She doesn't know you're here. How do you want to handle that? Aaliyah laughed, short, without humor, the laugh of someone who finds a situation absurd rather than funny. I have absolutely no idea, she said. I'm going to figure out my daughter's heart surgery first, and then I'm going to figure out how to explain to my mother why the man who... She stopped. One thing at a time. All right, he said. She looked at him across the consultation table. In the fluorescent light of the small room, she looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who has been managing a crisis with high competence and has temporarily run out of the energy required to keep the competence in front of the exhaustion. Why are you still here? She said, not hostile, genuine. He considered the question. Where else would I be? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. Seoul, she said, running your empire. That's where Jamin Kwan is supposed to be. Jamin Kwan is supposed to be here, he said. He just took 11 years to figure that out. She looked away. She picked up her notebook and put it in her bag and stood up. I'm going back to sit with her, she said. You should eat something. You've been here all night. She left the room. Jamin sat alone in the consultation room for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called Han and spent 45 minutes doing the things that needed to be done to keep Seoul from fracturing while he was not there. He was precise and efficient, and he resolved 3 of the outstanding issues during the call and delegated the Incheon negotiation with specific parameters that Han was authorized to execute without further consultation. When he finished the call, he went downstairs and ate something he did not taste at the hospital cafeteria and came back up to the 4th floor. Aaliyah's mother arrived at 3 in the afternoon. Sandra Brooks was 61 years old, a retired school teacher from Dallas, who wore her silver hair natural and carried herself with the permanent upright posture of a woman who had spent 30 years maintaining authority in front of rooms full of people who did not initially intend to listen. She came through the corridor doors with a rolling carry-on and found her daughter in the waiting area, and they held each other for a long time without speaking. Then Sandra looked over her daughter's shoulder and saw Jamin. The expression that traveled across her face was not simple. It moved through several stages. Recognition, because Aaliyah had clearly described him at some point, then assessment, then something that was not warmth but was not hostility either. It was the expression of a woman reserving judgment while collecting data. Mom, Aaliyah said, this is Jamin. Sandra Brooks looked at him steadily. I know who he is, she said. Jamin met her eyes. Mrs. Brooks. She studied him for a moment with the focused attention of a former educator evaluating whether something was genuine or performance. Then she said, You staying? Yes, he said. She held his gaze for another 3 seconds. Then she looked at her daughter and said, Let me put my bag down and go see my grandbaby, and walked past him toward the nurse's station. Aaliyah looked at Jamin. That went better than I expected, she said quietly. It went worse. An hour later, Sandra came back from Zara's room and sat down and was quiet for a few minutes, and then she looked at Jamin and said, She showed me her book. The scrapbook, he said. She has been keeping that book for 3 years. Why, Chimam? Sandra's voice was controlled, but the control was being applied to something underneath it that had significant pressure. 3 years of my granddaughter cutting pictures out of magazines of a man she had never met because she needed something to hold on to. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, he said. I don't think you do. She leaned forward. I was there when Aaliyah came home, 9 years ago. I was there when she showed up at my door at 2 in the morning with 2 suitcases and nothing else. I was there when she found out she was pregnant and terrified and alone. I was there for all of it. So when you sit in this waiting room looking like you're doing something admirable by being here, Mom, Aaliyah's voice was quiet. I am not done. I know you're not. But I need you to let me handle this. Sandra looked at her daughter. Something passed between them, the compressed communication of people who have been talking to each other across difficult situations for a long time. Sandra sat back. She picked up the paper coffee cup beside her chair and drank from it and said nothing more. The afternoon moved slowly. At 5, Jaemin stepped outside the hospital to make a call to Seo. The specialist list he had requested was ready. Dr. Tanaka at Cleveland Clinic had already responded to Dr. Reeves's file with a preliminary concurrence. The Boston contact was reviewing overnight. He was standing on the sidewalk outside the main entrance, phone at his ear, when a black SUV pulled up to the curb that he did not recognize. The door opened and Kwon Dae-jung stepped out. Jaemin ended his call. His father looked older than the last time he had seen him in person, 6 months ago in Seoul, a brief meeting about organizational restructuring. He was 70 years old in the body, but he stood with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that bearing was its own kind of authority, and he was wearing that authority now. Behind him, a second man stepped out of the SUV. Not a bodyguard, Jaemin noted. A lawyer. He recognized him. Park Jin-ho, the Kwon family's senior legal counsel for international matters. Father, Jaemin said. His voice was completely flat. I came to see my granddaughter, Kwon Dae-jung said. You don't have a granddaughter yet. You have a biological grandchild who doesn't know you exist. Those are different things. His father stopped in front of him. Up close, Jaemin could see something in the older man's face that surprised him. Not contrition, not exactly, but a hairline fracture in the absolute certainty that had always been his father's defining characteristic. I want to meet her. When Aaliyah decides that's appropriate. Jaemin, you flew to Houston with your lawyer, Jaemin said quietly. That tells me this isn't just a visit. What does Park have with him? His father was quiet for a moment. There are legal considerations around the child. Stop. The word came out with enough force that his father actually stopped. Do not tell me you have legal documents related to my daughter. Do not tell me that you flew here with a family lawyer while she is lying in a cardiac unit upstairs. Do not... He stopped. He made himself breathe. The technique was not working again, the same way it had not worked the night he found the documents in his grandmother's estate files. What does Park have? His father looked at him steadily. Your grandmother asked him to prepare a document. An acknowledgement of paternity structured in a way that brings the child formally into the Kwon family registry under Korean legal convention. It requires Aaliyah Carter's signature to be valid in an American jurisdiction, but she will not sign it. If she understands the benefits to the child in terms of the family's legal and financial protections, she will not sign it. Jaemin's voice had gone back to flat, which was worse than when it had been forceful. And I'm going to tell you something, Father, and I need you to hear it completely. If you go into that hospital and present Aaliyah with legal documents while her daughter is waiting for heart surgery, I will remove myself from the Kwon organization permanently. Not temporarily, not as a threat, as a fact. I will liquidate my shares through the structures we have in place. I will transfer operational authority to Han, and I will spend the remainder of my life in Houston as a private citizen. Park knows exactly what that does to the organization's structural integrity. Park Jin-ho, standing 3 feet behind Kwon Dae-jung, was looking at a spot on the sidewalk with the concentrated neutrality of a man who did not want to be part of this conversation. Kwon Dae-jung looked at his son for a long time. You would do that, he said. Not a question. I would. His father looked at the hospital entrance. He looked back at Jaemin. Something in him shifted. Not collapsed, Kwon Dae-jung did not collapse, but recalculated, the way powerful men recalibrate when they encounter a resistance they did not anticipate. "Put the documents away, Park," he said, without turning around. Park Jin-ho nodded and said nothing. Kwon Dae-jung looked at his son. "I would like to see the child, when it's appropriate, when the mother agrees." "I'll ask her," Jaemin said. His father nodded once. He looked at the hospital entrance again, and in the look was something Jaemin had not seen on his father's face in a very long time, something that was almost uncertain. "Is she going to be all right?" he said. "The girl?" "The surgery is Monday," Jaemin said. "Dr. Reeves is the best there is." His father nodded again. He turned and got back into the SUV. Park followed. The door closed and the vehicle pulled back into traffic. Jaemin stood on the sidewalk in the Houston evening heat and understood that he had just made a threat to his father that he had meant completely and would execute without hesitation, and that the organization that had defined the entire structure of his adult life had, in the space of this conversation, become a secondary concern. He went back inside. He rode the elevator to the 4th floor and came through the corridor doors and found Aaliyah standing in the middle of the waiting area looking at her phone with an expression that stopped him. "What happened?" he said. She looked up. Her face was the color of someone who has received a physical shock. "The insurance company," she said. Her voice was strange, flattened out, the way voices go when the mind is still processing something and has not yet assigned it a proper emotional register. "Dr. Reeves's billing coordinator just called. The insurance company reviewed the pre-authorization for the surgery and they're—" She stopped. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum for a moment. "They're denying it. They're classifying the procedure as elective based on a prior review code that was entered incorrectly 18 months ago. They say the defect was categorized as non-urgent in their system. And because it was categorized that way, they're saying Monday's surgery doesn't meet the emergency threshold for expedited coverage." Jaemin looked at her. "We'll pay for it directly." "The surgery costs $430,000, she said, "not including the anesthesia team, not including the electrophysiology unit on standby, not including the post-surgical ICU care." She looked at him with an expression that was not a request and was not hope and was not anything he had a clean name for. "I have savings. I have a business. I do not have $430,000 liquid." "I do," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Jaemin?" "Aaliyah." His voice was quiet and entirely certain. "Let me do this one thing." The corridor was very still around them. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, something had changed in the fundamental structure of the distance she had been maintaining between them since the parking garage. Not gone, not resolved, but shifted, the way a load-bearing wall shifts when something adjacent to it finally gives. "Okay," she said. He nodded. He took out his phone and called his financial director in Seoul and spoke for 4 minutes in a mixture of Korean and English while Aaliyah stood across from him and watched him dismantle whatever remained of the wall between who he had been and what he was becoming. When he ended the call, he said, "Dr. Reeves's billing department will have the transfer confirmation by 9 tomorrow morning." Aaliyah looked at him. She looked like she was going to say something, and then she looked like she had decided not to, and then she said it anyway. "Why?" she said. "Not the money. Why are you doing all of this? Why are you still here?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because she said in case," he said, "and I told her I'd be here before and after. And I have spent 11 years being a man who kept his word to everyone except the people who deserved it most." Aaliyah's jaw moved. She looked at the floor. When she looked back up, her eyes were wet, and she was not doing anything about it. "If something happens to her on that table," she said, her voice was stripped completely bare. "If she doesn't, she will," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But I know she's 9 years old and she has been waiting for her father long enough, and I am not going to let her wait anymore." Aaliyah put both hands over her face and stood there for a moment. He did not move toward her. He stayed where he was and let her have the moment because it was hers and because some things cannot be shared only witnessed. When her hands came down, she looked at him with an expression that was 10 years of anger and grief and survival and something underneath all of it that neither of them were going to name yet in a hospital corridor on a Saturday night. "There's a room down the hall with better chairs," she said finally. "Come on." He followed her down the corridor. Behind him, somewhere in the city, his father was in a hotel room recalculating. His grandmother was in Seoul carrying the weight of a phone call that had gone differently than she had managed things going in 40 years. His organization was running without him on instructions that would hold for days, maybe weeks, before something required a decision only he could make. All of it was behind him. In front of him was a corridor and a room with better chairs, and a woman who had survived everything his family had done to her. And somewhere down the hall, a small girl with his eyes sleeping with a broken heart that Monday morning was going to fix. And in Jae-min's pocket, his phone buzzed once. A message from Han marked urgent. 3 words that told him the Incheon situation had moved faster than the parameters he had given Han could contain, and that there was a decision required that could not be delegated, and that if he was not in Seoul within 72 hours, the deal would collapse and take 2 other structures with it. He read the message. He put the phone back in his pocket. He walked through the door that Aaliyah was holding open and sat down in a chair that was marginally better than the ones in the waiting area, and he did not call Han back. The room with better chairs had a window that faced the hospital's interior courtyard, a small square of outdoor space with 2 benches and a tree that nobody appeared to use. At 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, the courtyard was dark, except for a single ground-level lamp that made the tree's shadow go long and strange across the pavement. Jae-min sat in the chair nearest the window. Aaliyah sat across from him with her legs pulled up and her back against the armrest, the posture of someone who had decided to be uncomfortable in a specific direction because it was better than the alternatives. Sandra had gone to the hotel 2 blocks away at Aaliyah's insistence at 8 o'clock after extracting a promise that she would be called the moment anything changed. Nothing changed. They sat in the room with the window in the courtyard and the single lamp, and the monitors down the hall made their small, regular sounds. And occasionally a nurse walked past the open door with the quiet efficiency of people who worked the night shift and had stopped performing for the benefit of the people watching. Jae-min's phone was in his pocket. He could feel it the way you feel something that requires a response you are not ready to give. A physical awareness, slightly pressured, located precisely. Han had sent a follow-up message at 9:45. 2 sentences. The Incheon partners had moved their meeting to Sunday morning Seoul time, which was Saturday evening Houston time, and they were not going to wait past that meeting for Heyman's position. If he was not reachable by then, they were going to interpret his absence as divestment and proceed accordingly. Jae-min had read it and put the phone back in his pocket. "You keep doing that," Aaliyah said. He looked at her. "Your pocket," she said. "You keep touching your phone and not looking at it. There's something in Seoul that needs a decision." How bad? He considered how honest to be. Then he remembered that he was sitting in a hospital room at 10 at night after making a threat to his father that had been entirely genuine, and that the woman across from him had survived 11 years of consequences from people who had not been honest with her. And he said, "If I don't respond by tomorrow morning, their time, I lose a partnership structure that took 7 years to build. It will destabilize 3 other business relationships and probably trigger a restructuring that Han is not equipped to manage alone." Aaliyah was quiet for a moment. "So go." "No." "Jae-min, no," he said again, not forcefully, just finally. She looked at him with an expression that was not gratitude and was not the opposite of gratitude, but was somewhere in the territory between what a person feels when someone does something they did not ask for and cannot fully accept. "You're going to lose things," she said. "Yes." "Important things." "Yes." "And you're just—" She stopped. She shook her head slightly, a small movement that was not dismissal but something more like recalibration, a person adjusting to information that does not fit the existing model. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." They were quiet for a while. At some point after midnight, she fell asleep in the chair, her head tipped against the back of it, her hands loose in her lap. Jae-min did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the window and watched the courtyard and the long, strange shadow of the tree. And at 2 in the morning, he took out his phone and called Han. "Incheon is gone," he said when Han answered. Let it go. I need you to contact Park Industries directly. Speak to the elder Park, not the son, and tell him I will call him personally on Monday. I will give him the Yongsan license arrangement as a standalone deal. That keeps him from following the Shin family out. The Shin family is going to leave regardless of what we do, so begin the process of identifying who their port contacts will work with next and position us to be the answer. Document everything and send it to me by tomorrow night. Han was quiet for 3 seconds. The Inchin deal was worth, I know what it was worth. Another beat. All right, Han said. He did not ask why. He had been with Jaemin for 14 years, and he understood which questions were not questions. Jaemin ended the call. He had just surrendered a deal worth more money than most nations carried in particular reserve accounts, and he felt it the way you feel something you have been holding for a long time when you finally put it down. A specific muscular release, complicated by the fact that the weight had been so familiar that its absence was almost disorienting. He looked at Aaliyah sleeping in the chair. He looked at the courtyard. He stayed awake until morning. Sunday arrived the way hospital Sundays do, without announcement, the light changing gradually in the window, and the shift change happening in the corridor, and the quality of the building's silence shifting from the particular quiet of 3 in the morning to the different quiet of 7, which had more movement in it. Aaliyah woke up and looked at him and said, "You didn't sleep. I don't need much." "That's not what I asked." She straightened in the chair and pushed her hair back and pressed both palms flat against her eyes for a moment. "Go get coffee. There's a better place on the 2nd floor, not the cafeteria." He went. He came back with 2 cups, and she accepted hers without comment, and they sat with the coffee in the gray morning light and did not talk for a while. At 8:15, Kwon Dae-jung appeared in the doorway. Jaemin had not told him which room they were in. His father had found it anyway, which was a thing his father was capable of. He had not built 40 years of organizational influence by being unable to locate specific rooms in specific buildings. He stood in the doorway in the same suit as the night before, which meant he had not gone back to wherever he was staying. And he looked at Aaliyah with the expression of a man confronting something he has prepared for, and discovered he was not as prepared as he thought. Aaliyah looked at him. She had known who he was from the first second. Jaemin could see that. She had Jaemin's face memorized, and Kwon Dae-jung wore 60% of that face. And she was a woman who had spent 11 years thinking about the people who had destroyed her life, so she knew exactly who was standing in the door before anyone said a word. She did not stand up. "Mr. Kwon," she said. Her voice was measured. "Ms. Carter." His father came into the room 2 steps and stopped, as though he recognized that the room had a geography that did not belong to him, and he was a guest in it. "I wanted to ask about the child's condition." "She's stable," Aaliyah said. "Surgery is tomorrow morning." His father nodded. He was looking at her with the focused attention of a man doing something he did not do often, genuinely assessing another person without the prior conclusion already reached. "I would like to see her," he said, "if that is possible." "I understand if it is not." Aaliyah was quiet for a long moment. Jaemin watched her and said nothing. "Not today," she said. "After the surgery, when she's recovered enough to handle a meeting with a stranger." She looked at Kwon Dae-jung steadily. "And she will be told exactly who you are and what your relationship to her is before she meets you. I won't have her confused about it." His father absorbed this. "That is reasonable," he said. "I know it is," Aaliyah said. Another silence. His father looked at him, then back at Aaliyah. He seemed to be working toward something that was not coming easily, the way speech does not come easily to men who have spent their lives in positions where other people waited for them to be ready. "I owe you an apology," he said. The words came out with the particular stiffness of someone saying something true that they have not said before. "What was done to you, what my mother arranged and what I allowed by not preventing it, was wrong. The consequences of it were severe, and they were borne by you alone." He paused. "I cannot restore what was taken, but I want you to know that I understand the weight of it." Aaliyah looked at him for a long time. "I appreciate you saying that," she said, The sentence was careful and precise. Neither acceptance nor rejection. The answer of a woman who understood that forgiveness was not something that happened in hospital rooms on Sunday mornings and was not going to pretend otherwise. His father nodded once. He looked at Jae-min. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not resolution, but the specific acknowledgement of two people who have arrived at a boundary they are both going to have to live on opposite sides of for a while. His father left without saying anything else. Aaliyah exhaled slowly when the doorway was empty again. He practiced that, she said. Probably, Jamin said. It still counted. She looked at her coffee cup. It still counted, she said again, quieter, as though confirming something to herself. The rest of Sunday moved in the incremental way of days spent waiting for something irrevocable. Dr. Reeves came by at noon to walk them through the surgical timeline. First cut at 7 Monday morning, the team staging at 6, Zara to be transferred to the pre-surgical unit at 5:30. She should eat nothing after midnight. She should sleep if she could. Sandra arrived from the hotel at 2 in the afternoon with food she had apparently cooked in the hotel room's microwave, supplemented by things from a nearby grocery store, packed into containers with the focused practicality of a woman who addressed crisis through provision. She set it out on the room's side table without commentary and looked at Jae-min and said, "You need to eat something that's actually food," and put a container in front of him. He ate it. Sandra watched him eat with the expression of a woman recalculating, slowly and without announcement. At 3 o'clock, Zara was awake and allowed visitors for an hour. They went in. Aaliyah, Jae-min, Sandra, and the room rearranged itself around the child in the bed who was the reason all of them were there. Zara was alert and slightly irritated about the IV in her left hand and wanted to know if her backpack was still in the corner, which it was, and then she wanted to know if Jae-min had eaten anything, and when Sandra said she had made him, Zara nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose instructions have been carried out. "Are you scared?" Aaliyah asked her. "A little." She looked at her IV hand. "Not about the surgery, about after." She looked up. "What if after feels different?" "Different how, baby?" Zara thought about it. "Like, what if I wake up and everything is the same but I feel different? Like the thing they fix changes something else." Aaliyah sat on the edge of the bed and took her daughter's hand carefully, mindful of the IV. "Dr. Reeves is fixing the thing that was making your heart work too hard," she said. "After that, your heart gets to just be a heart. It doesn't have to compensate anymore." Zara considered this. "Okay," she said. She looked at Jae-min. "Will you be there when I wake up?" "Yes," he said. "Both of you?" "Both of us," Aaliyah said, without looking at him. Zara settled back against the pillow with the expression of someone who has received confirmation of a logistical arrangement they considered important. "Okay," she said again. "I'm going to sleep now. You can stay if you want, but you don't have to." They stayed. The call came at 7 Sunday evening. Jae-min was in the corridor outside Zara's room when his phone showed a Seoul number. Not Han, not Seo, not any of the lieutenants. His grandmother's line. He answered. Kwon Mi-suk's voice was different again from the last time he had heard it. More deliberate, as though each word was being placed with specific intention. "I have been speaking with your father," she said. "I know," he said. "He told me what you said outside the hospital last night." A pause. "He said you meant it." "I did." "I believe you." Another pause, longer. "I am coming to Houston." Jamin stopped walking. "No." "Jamin, the surgery is tomorrow morning. You are not going to appear in this hospital the night before my daughter's surgery and create a situation that Aaliyah has to manage on top of everything else. No. I need to speak with her. After the surgery, after Zara recovers, when Aaliyah is ready." His voice was quiet and absolute. "You do not get to set the timeline on this. You lost that when you set the timeline on everything else." Silence. "I know what I did," his grandmother said. "I know you do. I want to—" She stopped. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it he had not heard before in 61 years of knowing her, and it took him a moment to identify it because it was so unfamiliar. It was the sound of a person who has run out of the specific architecture that has held them upright for decades and is standing in the structural gap trying to find new footing. "I'm an old woman," she said, "and I have been very sure of a great many things for a very long time, and most of them were correct, and some of them were not. And the ones that were not—" She stopped again. "I would like the chance to say so, in person, to her." He was quiet. "After the surgery," he said, "I'll speak to Aaliyah. That's all I can promise." "That is enough," she said. He ended the call and stood in the hospital corridor and looked at the linoleum for a moment, and then went back into the room where his daughter was sleeping. Sound. At 11:30 Sunday night, they moved Zara to the pre-surgical unit. She was awake for the transfer, drowsy but conscious, her backpack carried by a nurse who had caught on that the bag was non-negotiable. The pre-surgical room was smaller and had different equipment and a different quality of quiet, a readiness to it, everything arranged in preparation for something that would happen in a specific number of hours. Zara looked at the room and looked at Aaliyah and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." Aaliyah leaned close. "What, baby?" Zara's voice was quiet and slightly blurred with tiredness. "I'm not actually that scared," she said. "I just said that earlier so you wouldn't worry that I wasn't scared enough, because I know that would worry you too." Aaliyah made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite crying, and was somehow both. "You're 9 years old," she said. "Almost 10, Zara said. "Almost 10. Aaliyah smoothed her daughter's hair back. "Go to sleep." Zara's eyes moved to Jaimin. She looked at him with those precise dark eyes that were half his and half something entirely her own. "I'm glad you came," she said, "even if it took a long time." He sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed. "I'm sorry it took a long time," he said. "It's okay," she said, in the way children say things that they mean completely and without calculation. "You're here now." She fell asleep within minutes. Jamin sat in the chair beside her bed, and Aaliyah sat on the other side, and the pre-surgical unit was very quiet around them, and neither of them spoke for a long time. At some point, Aaliyah said quietly, "Jaimin." He looked at her across the bed where their daughter was sleeping. "Thank you," she said. Just that. The two words stripped of everything except what they were. He nodded. They sat in the silence of the room, and outside the window, the Houston night was doing whatever Houston nights did. Enormous and dark and indifferent, the city running on its own logic below them. And between the two chairs, in the bed, Zara breathed in the slow, even rhythm of a child who had decided, with complete practical confidence, that morning was coming, and her parents would both be there when it arrived. 5:15 in the morning. The pre-surgical team arrived and began their preparations with the brisk, organized efficiency of people for whom this sequence was daily and precise. Zara was awake, quiet, compliant. She let them do what they needed to do. She held Aaliyah's hand until the point where she couldn't anymore. And then she looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has decided to be calm through an act of sustained will. At 5:55, an orderly came to move her. Aaliyah leaned down and held her daughter's face in her hands and looked at her. "Mom," Zara said, "you're going to mess up my hair." "I don't care about your hair." "I know. I'm just saying." Aaliyah kissed her forehead and stepped back. Zara looked at Jamin. He leaned down, and he was not a man who had practice at this, at the specific gesture of a father's goodbye to a child before something serious. But he put his hand against her cheek, and she put her small hand over his, and he said, "I'll be right here." "I know," she said. "You already said." They wheeled her out. The door swung closed behind the orderly and the gurney and his daughter, and the pre-surgical room was suddenly just a room, and Jaimin and Aaliyah were standing on opposite sides of the empty bed, looking at each other. Aaliyah's hands were at her sides and her jaw was working, and her eyes were doing something she was not going to let become anything more than what it was. And Jaimin crossed the room, and he did not ask permission, and he put his arms around her, and she stood rigid for exactly 2 seconds, and then something in her gave all the way, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed in the ragged, effortful way of someone who has been holding something at bay for a very long time. He held on. Outside the room, the hospital was shifting into the particular mode of early Monday morning. The day shift arriving, the cafeteria opening, the ordinary machinery of a building where serious things happened and life continued anyway around them. In operating room 3 on the 6th floor, a team of 11 people were moving through their setup checklist with the focused precision of those entrusted with the most specific and delicate kind of work. Jae-min stood in the empty pre-surgical room, holding the mother of his daughter, and his phone buzzed once in his pocket. Han, probably, or his father, or someone in Seoul who needed an answer to something that had been the most important thing in the world 72 hours ago. He did not move. And then Aaliyah pulled back and looked up at him, with her face wrecked and her eyes clear, and said, "I need you to know something." He waited. "I never stopped." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She looked at him with everything she had spent 11 years building walls around and said, "I tried. I tried very hard to stop, and I couldn't." The room was entirely still. "I know," he said. "Neither could I." She looked at him for one long moment, and then she stepped back and straightened her jacket and said, "Okay, come on. The surgical waiting room is on 6, and walked toward the door, and he followed her into the corridor where the morning was already underway, and somewhere above them, a surgical team was making the first precise incision into the chest of a 9-year-old girl who had spent 3 years keeping a scrapbook because she had not known what else to do with the knowledge that her father existed, and the next 4 to 6 hours were going to be the longest either of them had ever lived through, and they were going to live through them together. And in the 6th floor surgical waiting room, when they walked in, Kwon Dae-jung was already seated in a chair by the window. And beside him, just arrived, her white hair precise, and her posture upright, and her hands folded in her lap with the stillness of someone who has flown through the night to be in a specific place at a specific moment, was Kwon Mi-suk. Aaliyah stopped walking. Kwon Mi-suk looked at her. And for the first time in 11 years, the woman who had destroyed Aaliyah Brooks's life looked at her without the certainty of someone who believed they had done the right thing. And what was in her face instead was something that had no armor left around it at all. Jae-min stood between them in the waiting room doorway and felt the entire weight of the last 11 years compress into the silence of the next 10 seconds, waiting to see what Aaliyah was going to do. Aaliyah stood in the doorway of the 6th floor surgical waiting room and did not move. Kwon Mi-suk did not move either. She sat in the chair by the window with her hands folded and her white hair precise, and her face carrying something that had no name in any language Aaliyah spoke, because it was the specific expression of a person who has arrived at the end of a long certainty and found nothing on the other side of it except the damage the certainty had caused. Jae-min was beside Aaliyah. He did not speak. He had positioned himself in the specific way of a man who was present as a witness and not as an intermediary, because he had understood since the parking garage, maybe earlier, maybe always, that there were things between these two women that his presence could not resolve and his absence could not protect anyone from. Sandra was in the corner chair. She had arrived before any of them, apparently, and she sat with her coffee and her composure and watched the doorway with the patient attention of a woman who had seen this moment coming for 11 years and had opinions about it that she was, for now, keeping to herself. Kwon Dae-jung stood near his mother's chair. He looked at his son with an expression that asked nothing and offered nothing and simply acknowledged that whatever happened next was happening. Aaliyah walked into the room. She chose a chair on the far side, not near the window, not near Kwon Mi-suk, but not as far as she could have gone either. She sat down. She put her bag on the floor beside the chair and her hands in her lap, and she looked at the far wall where a generic landscape print hung in a metal frame, the kind of art hospitals put on walls to give people somewhere to rest their eyes when they cannot look at each other. Jae-min sat beside her. The room was quiet for approximately 4 minutes. Jae-min knew because he watched the clock on the wall make its small institutional movements and counted them without meaning to. Then Kwon Mi-suk said, "Ms. Carter." Aaliyah did not turn her head immediately. She finished whatever she was doing inside herself, and then she turned and looked at the old woman across the room. "I will not ask you to receive what I say as anything other than what it is," Kwon Mi-suk said. Her English was careful and precise. She had spoken it for 50 years of international business, and it carried the specific accent of someone who had learned it as a strategic tool and then lived inside it long enough that it had become something more. I am not here to defend what I did. I am not here to explain it in terms that make it more bearable. I am here because my great-granddaughter is in an operating room and I am old enough to understand that there are things I will not be able to say if I wait for a better moment. Aaliyah said nothing. I told myself, Kwon Mi-suk continued, for 11 years, that I had made a difficult decision in difficult circumstances and that it was the correct one. I told myself that the Kwon family required a specific kind of continuity and that you represented a disruption to that continuity. I told myself that Jae-min would recover. She paused. The pause was not theatrical. It was the pause of a person choosing whether to go further down a road they have started on and deciding they have no choice. I told myself the child did not change anything, because I had already made the decision and reversing it would require admitting that the decision had been wrong. She looked at her hands for a moment. I watched my grandson for 10 years become a man who trusted no one and felt nothing and built an empire with absolute efficiency and no interior life. And I told myself that was strength. That was the Kwon way. Her voice was steady, but it had a quality to it like something very old being handled carefully because it might not survive rough treatment. What I was watching was a man I had hollowed out. The landscape print on the wall, the clock, the small sounds of the hospital continuing around them. "What you did to me," Aaliyah said, and her voice was not loud and it was not shaking, but it had a density to it, a compression, the voice of a person who has been saving specific words for a specific moment, was not a difficult decision in difficult circumstances. I was 23 years old, and I was pregnant and alone in a country where I knew almost no one. And 2 people came to my apartment and told me the man I loved had already agreed to sell me out. They showed me documents. They made me believe that everything I thought was real had been a calculation. She paused. I got on a plane. I went back to my mother's house. I sat in my childhood bedroom and I tried to understand how I had been stupid enough to believe that someone like Jae-min Kwon had actually loved me. She looked at the old woman. It took me 2 years to stop blaming myself. 2 years. And by then I had a 1-year-old daughter and a business I was building from scratch. And I did not have the luxury of falling apart, so I didn't. I just kept moving. Kwon Mi-suk was looking at her with complete attention. "I don't know what you want from me," Aaliyah said. "I don't know what you think I can give you, but I want you to know what it actually cost. Not the version where it was a difficult decision. The version where a young woman spent 2 years believing she had been a fool and raised her daughter alone, and watched her daughter collect pictures of a father she had never met, and found out 14 months ago that her daughter has a structural defect in her heart that nobody caught because she didn't have access to the kind of comprehensive medical care she would have had if her life had been different." Her voice did not rise. If anything, it got quieter and more precise. "I want you to know the specific shape of what you took." The room was very still. Kwon Mi-suk said, "I know it." "Do you?" "Yes." The word was simple and without qualification. "I know it completely, and I cannot restore it. And I am sorry, Ms. Carter. Not as a woman of my family or my position, but as a person who made a choice that caused enormous damage to people who did not deserve it, and who has had to live with knowing that for the last several months, in a way, I did not allow myself to live with it before." She looked at her hands again. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I understand that is not something that can be asked for in a hospital waiting room. I am asking only that you know I understand what I did. Completely. Without the justifications I used to carry." Aaliyah looked at her for a long time. Sandra in the corner had put down her coffee. She was watching her daughter with the focused stillness of a mother who knows when to be a wall and when to be a witness. "Okay," Aaliyah said finally. The word was not forgiveness and was not its opposite. It was the word of a woman who had put something down, not discarded it, not resolved it, but set it on a surface where it could exist without requiring her to carry it every second. "Okay." Nobody spoke for a while after that. At 7:43, a nurse appeared in the doorway to confirm that the surgical team had begun. Estimated completion between 11:30 and 1, depending on what they found. Someone would update them at the midpoint. They settled in to wait. Waiting in that room was its own kind of duration. Not the duration of hours exactly, but the duration of a particular sustained state. Attention held in one direction, breath slightly shallower than normal, every sound from the corridor evaluated and released. Jamin had been in rooms before where outcomes were being decided in other rooms. Negotiations, legal proceedings, organizational crises managed from a distance. He had always been good at the waiting. He had trained himself to metabolize uncertainty the way other people metabolized routine. This was not that. This was 4 hours of sitting in a plastic chair in a room where the people around him were all carrying versions of the same specific fear. And the fear had no tactical application, and the only thing available to do with it was to continue sitting in the chair. He got coffee at 8:30 and brought cups back for everyone without asking who wanted one. Sandra accepted hers with a look at him that was not warm and was not cold and was moving, slowly and with evident reluctance toward something else. Kwon Dae-jung accepted his and nodded once. Kwon Mi-suk held hers and did not drink it and looked at the window. At 9:15, Aaliyah stood up and walked to the window and stood there looking at the Houston morning outside. The city was doing its Monday morning thing. Traffic, movement, ordinary life continuing at street level with no awareness of the sixth-floor waiting room above it. Jamin watched her from the chair. After a moment, he stood and walked to the window and stood beside her. They looked out at the city together. "She's going to be okay," he said. "You said that already." "I know. You still don't know it's true." "No," he said. "But I know her. She decided she was going to be fine, and she told me she was going to sleep, and she did it in 4 minutes. She's the most determined person I've ever met, and I run a criminal organization." Aaliyah made the sound again, the one that was not quite a laugh and not quite crying. "She gets that from me," she said. "Obviously," he said. She looked at him sideways. The corner of her mouth moved. It was not a smile exactly, but it was the shape that existed just before one, and it was the first time he had seen her face do that, and it hit him somewhere in the chest with the specific force of something he had not known he was waiting for. They stood at the window for a while. "What happens after?" Aaliyah said. Not a complete question, but he knew what she meant. "I stay in Houston," he said. "I've already started identifying properties. I have a team in Seoul that can manage the day-to-day operation. There are things that require me personally, but most of them can be handled remotely or with quarterly visits." He paused. "I lost some things this week. The Incheon deal's gone. The Shin family pulled out of their arrangements." He said it the way he said most things, without drama, as information. "It will cost the organization significantly in the short term. We'll rebuild around it." Aaliyah turned to look at him. "You lost that while you were here." "Yes." "Because you didn't go back." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Jamin, it was not worth more than being in this building," he said. "That's not a difficult calculation." She looked at him for a moment longer, then she looked back out the window. "I don't know what we are," she said. "I need you to know that. I don't know what I can give you or what I'm ready for. I know who you are to Zara. I know what I want for her. What I am to you, what you are to me. I don't have that answer yet." "I'm not asking for the answer," he said. "I'm asking for the chance to be in the same city while you figure it out." She was quiet. "That's all," he said. She looked at him one more time, and then she nodded. Small, specific, the nod of a woman making a decision she is going to commit to because she has decided the alternative costs more than she is willing to pay. The update came at 10:55. A surgical nurse appeared in the doorway and told them the procedure was going well. They were past the primary repair. The heart was responding well to the correction. Estimated another 45 minutes to an hour for closing. The room exhaled. Not all at once. Sequentially, each person letting out the breath they had been holding in the specific pattern of their own fear. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment and pressed her hand to her chest. Kwon Dae-jung looked at the floor and then at the window. Kwon Mi-suk was still and said nothing, but something in the set of her shoulders changed. Jamin sat with both elbows on his knees and looked at his hands. He had very specific hands, scarred at the knuckles in the old way, not from any single event, but from the accumulated evidence of a long time spent in situations that required him to be physical about things. He had learned to fight young. He had fought as a tool, not a pleasure. His hands were the most honest part of him in some ways, carrying the history of everything he had done that he did not otherwise keep evidence of. He looked at them and thought about Zara's small hand over his the night before. The weight of it, the complete uncalculated trust of the gesture, and he understood completely and for the first time what it meant that she had been 9 years old and collecting photographs because she had needed something to hold on to. He was going to be something she could hold on to from now on. That was not a resolution. It was not the end of difficulty. It was a commitment made in a waiting room to a child who was not present, and it had the weight of every commitment he had ever made, which were not many, because he did not make them lightly, and he did not make them, and then fail to keep them. At 12:17, Dr. Reeves came through the waiting room door. She was still in her surgical cap. She looked at Aaliyah first. Her face was the face of someone carrying good news and being careful with it, because good news in this context was still serious news and deserved to be delivered with appropriate gravity. "The repair is complete," she said. She did extremely well. The defect is closed. Her heart rhythm stabilized beautifully once the repair was in place. We did not need the electrophysiology team for intervention. She is in recovery now, and she is awake, and she is asking about her backpack. Aaliyah sat down. She did not mean to. Her legs simply completed the negotiation between the news and her body, and the chair was there. She put both hands over her mouth and sat with that for a moment. Sandra made a sound. She covered it immediately, but it was there, the sound of a grandmother on the other side of something she had been terrified of. Jamin stood up and felt his legs and his hands and his chest all doing things simultaneously that he did not have names for, the full-body evidence of having been afraid in a sustained way and receiving the information that the thing you feared has not happened. "Can we see her?" Aaliyah said. Her voice came out rough. "Give us 45 minutes in recovery," Dr. Reeves said. "Then, yes, 2 at a time initially. She's going to be groggy and she's going to have some pain, which we're managing. But she is alert, and she is herself." She paused. She told the recovery nurse she had dreamed something, and she wanted to tell her mother. "I don't know what that means, but she was fairly insistent about it." Aaliyah laughed, a real one, full and cracked around the edges and completely uncontrolled. She pressed both hands harder against her mouth, and her shoulders shook once. Jamin looked at the ceiling for a moment. It was a plain hospital ceiling, white acoustic tile, the kind of ceiling that had no qualities whatsoever. He looked at it for several seconds. Then he looked at Kwan Mi-suk. The old woman was sitting very straight in her chair and her eyes were wet, and she was not doing anything to prevent it or conceal it, which was the most unexpected thing Jamin had seen in the entire duration of this week that had contained many unexpected things. Kwan Mi-suk, in 61 years of knowing her, had not cried in front of him once. She was not crying now exactly, but her eyes were wet and she was looking at the door Dr. Reeves had come through, and on her face was an expression that Jamin thought might be what relief looked like on a person who had not allowed themselves to hope. They brought Zara back to a recovery room at 1:15. She was smaller again the way she had been smaller in the cardiac unit room, but this smallness was different. It was the specific smallness of a child who has been through something large and is resting on the other side of it. Not diminished exactly, but temporarily quieted. She had tubes and monitors and a hospital gown, and her hair was still pushed back the way the surgical team had arranged it. And she looked at Aaliyah when her mother came through the door with the particular expression of someone who has a thing they need to say and has been waiting with some impatience to say it. "Mom," Zara said. Her voice was slightly slurred from the anesthesia residue. "I dreamed we were a family." Aaliyah sat on the edge of the recovery bed. "Tell me." "It wasn't like a weird dream. It was just normal. We were somewhere with a yard, and there was a dog." She paused, considering. "A big one, gold-colored." She looked past her mother to where Jamin was standing in the doorway. "Were you in the yard too?" she asked him. "Yes," he said. "I was in the yard." Zara looked at him with the direct and serious eyes that were going to be, he understood, the most clarifying thing in his life for as long as she chose to use them on him. "Okay," she said. She seemed satisfied. She looked at her IV hand. "This is uncomfortable." "I know, baby." "When can I have my backpack?" "Soon." I want to show Grandma the book, Zara said. The Korean one. She looked at her mother. Is she here? Aaliyah went very still for a fraction of a second. Which grandmother, baby? Zara looked at her with the expression of someone explaining something that should not require explanation. Both, she said. I have two now, right? Aaliyah looked at Jamin across the recovery room. He looked back at her. Yes, Aaliyah said quietly. You have two. Zara nodded, satisfied with the accounting, and closed her eyes. Tell them I'll be awake in a little while, she said, in the voice of someone issuing instructions before a brief administrative absence. And tell the gold one about the dog. She was asleep again in under 2 minutes. The conversation between Aaliyah and Kwon Mi-suk happened 2 days later, in the small family consultation room off the cardiac unit corridor. Jamin was not present. He had asked if Aaliyah wanted him there, and she had said no, and he had said okay, and he had gone to sit with Zara while the two women occupied the consultation room for 40 minutes. He did not know everything that was said. He knew that when Aaliyah came out, her eyes were red at the edges, but her jaw was set and her posture was the posture of a woman who had completed something difficult and was still standing. He knew that when Kwon Mi-suk came out behind her, the old woman's face had the specific quality of someone who has put down something they have been carrying for a long time. Not lighter exactly, because what they carried has left a permanent mark, but differently arranged. He knew that Aaliyah looked at him when she came through the door and said, She's going home to Seoul on Thursday. I told her that when Zara is recovered, if Zara wants to meet her, I will allow it. That's more than fair, he said. I know it is. She looked at him steadily. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for Zara. Because Zara deserves to know where she comes from, all of it, even the parts that are complicated. I know, he said. She nodded and went into Zara's room, and he stood in the corridor for a moment and then followed. Zara was discharged 9 days after the surgery. The discharge morning had a particular quality to it, the organized dismantling of a temporary situation, the reassembly of the portable elements of a life. Aaliyah packed the bag with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a week. Zara supervised from the bed, directing the placement of each item in the backpack with the focused attention of a project manager who has strong opinions about packing methodology. Sandra had gone back to Dallas the day before, with a long embrace for her daughter and a shorter but definite one for Jae-min that surprised him enough that he did not have time to respond before it was over. She had looked at him when she pulled back and said, You have a lot of years to make up for. And he had said, I know. And she had said, Good, and gotten in the car. Kwon Dae-jung had left on Wednesday. He had come to Zara's room on Tuesday afternoon and sat in the corner chair while Aaliyah introduced him as Jae-min's father, Zara's other grandfather, and Zara had looked at him with the measuring assessment she applied to all new information and then shown him 3 pages of her scrapbook and asked him if he knew what the text said in one of the Korean magazines because she had never been able to read it. Kwon Dae-jung had looked at the page for a moment and then read it to her in English, his voice careful and even, a profile piece from 6 years ago about Jae-min's expansion of the organization's legitimate holdings. Zara had listened with complete attention. When he finished, she said, He does a lot, and Kwon Dae-jung had looked at her and said, He does. He is very capable. And then, after a moment, he had said, You are also very capable, I can see that. And Zara had considered this and said thank you with the seriousness of someone accepting an assessment they found accurate. Jae-min had stood in the corner of the room and watched his father talk to his daughter and felt something that did not have a clean name. It was in the territory of grief and resolution, and the particular ache of understanding that the things that had been broken were not going to be unbroken, but were going to become something else, something with different edges, less sharp in some places and still sharp in others. On discharge morning, when the nurse brought the final paperwork, Zara looked at Jae-min and said, Are you coming to the house? If your mom says yes, he said. Zara looked at Aaliyah. Mom. Aaliyah was signing the discharge forms. Yes, she said without looking up. Zara looked back at Jae-min with the satisfied expression of someone whose logistical arrangements have come together correctly. Okay, she said. I want to show you my room. I have more pictures, not in the book. On my wall. I'd like to see them, he said. Aaliyah's house was a craftsman bungalow in a quiet part of Midtown Houston, with a front porch and a live oak tree in the yard whose roots had started making opinions known about the front walkway. Inside it was the specific organized warmth of a home that had been built around a child. Drawings on the refrigerator, a collection of interesting rocks on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, a small pile of library books on the coffee table in various states of being read. Zara gave him the tour with the proprietary confidence of a host who is proud of their establishment. Her room had a blue accent wall and a desk with 3 containers of markers organized by color, and yes, a section of wall beside her window where photographs had been printed and pinned with small colored tacks in a loose arrangement that was not quite a grid. He stood in front of it and looked at the images. Some he recognized from the scrapbook, some he hadn't seen, and in the center of the arrangement, slightly larger than the others, a photograph he did not recognize at all. It took him a moment to understand what it was. It was a screenshot printed on regular paper from what appeared to be a blurry security camera image taken at a public event in Seoul several years ago. In the image, he was turned slightly away from the camera, and the quality was poor, but there was something in the angle of it, something particular about the way he was standing. That made the image feel more personal than the professional photographs around it, more real. "Where did you get that one?" he said. "A blog," Zara said. She stood beside him looking at the wall. "Someone at an event took it on their phone and posted it. I don't know who. I found it when I was searching." She pointed at the center image. "That's my favorite, because you look like a regular person in that one." He looked at the photograph. "I am a regular person," he said. Zara considered this with the skepticism it probably deserved. "Mostly," she said. He looked at the wall, at the collected evidence of 3 years of a child's sustained attention toward a man she had never met. He thought about the parking garage, and the scrapbook on the park bench, and the recovery room, and in case, and the specific weight of a small hand placed over his. "Zara," he said. "Yeah. I'm going to find a house in Houston, close to here, and I'm going to be around, not just visiting, around." He looked at her. "Is that okay with you?" She looked at him with those precise dark eyes, his eyes, carrying some quality that was entirely her own. "I already said yes when you asked me at the park," she said. "I know. I wanted to say it again." She nodded as though confirming that the repetition was acceptable and the information remained consistent. Then she went to her desk and picked up a purple marker and said, "Sit down. I want to show you something." And he sat down on the edge of her bed and watched his daughter begin explaining to him with great seriousness and a significant number of purple diagrams how the cardiovascular system worked, which she had apparently spent the past 14 months learning about in considerable detail. He listened to every word. 3 months passed the way months pass when they contain a great deal of living, not quickly and not slowly, but with the specific density of time that is being used. Zara recovered fully. Dr. Reeves declared her structurally repaired and functionally normal at her 6-week post-surgical follow-up, and Zara had looked at the imaging of her own corrected heart with the focused interest of a person reviewing the results of a project they had been involved in and found the outcome satisfactory. She went back to school. She joined a weekend art class. She was by all available evidence completely herself, the concentrated, serious, occasionally startling version of herself that she had always been, now with an additional reserve of physical energy she had apparently not known she was missing. Jae-min found a house 6 blocks from Aaliyah's. It had a yard. The yard was the size of the yard in Zara's dream, a coincidence he did not mention to anyone because it seemed like the kind of thing that was better lived than narrated. He had it furnished and set up a workroom for the operational aspects of his life that still required regular attention, and he established the rhythm of a man building a presence in a place rather than passing through it. He had dinner at Aaliyah's house on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He took Zara to her art class on Saturdays. He was learning Houston by driving it, the specific logic of the freeways, the neighborhoods that shifted character across a single intersection, the way the city expanded in all directions simultaneously without apparent concern for whether the expansion was logical. He and Aaliyah were careful with each other. That was the word for it, careful, in the way of people who understand that what they are building requires a different approach than what they had attempted before, when they were young and had not yet learned the full cost of things. There were evenings on her front porch after Zara was asleep, where they talked the way people talk when they are relearning someone, testing the new edges of a person, finding where they match the memory and where they have grown into something different. There were evenings where they did not talk much at all and sat with the comfortable particular silence of people who do not need to fill every space. He did not rush it. She did not rush it. They were both people who had learned, at significant personal cost, that speed was not the same as arrival. One evening in November, 4 months after the surgery, Jae-min came to dinner and Zara met him at the door and told him she had learned to make jeon, Korean pancakes, from a video online, and that she had made them for dinner, and that he was going to tell her honestly if they were correct. They were not entirely correct. The batter was slightly too thick, and she had been impatient with the heat, and some of them were more brown than they should have been. He ate 4 of them and told her the flavor was right, and the technique needed refinement, and she should try again next week, which she accepted as useful professional feedback. Aaliyah watched this from across the table with an expression that she did not attempt to control or conceal. After dinner, after Zara had gone to bed, Jaemin was washing the dishes at Aaliyah's kitchen sink, a habit that had established itself naturally, no discussion, just the accumulation of Tuesday and Thursday dinners into a pattern. When Aaliyah came to stand beside him, she leaned against the counter. She looked at him. "I need to tell you something," she said. He turned off the water. He turned to look at her. "I stopped being angry at you sometime in the last few months," she said. "I don't know exactly when. I was not going to tell you because it felt like giving something up. But I'm tired of carrying it as a secret." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not saying everything is resolved. I'm not saying it doesn't still hurt in specific places. But the anger, the kind I was living inside, that's gone." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. "That's all you're going to say. What would you like me to say?" She thought about it. "I don't know," she said. "I think I just needed to say it out loud to someone." "Then I'm glad you said it to me," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, the scarred one, the one that carried all the evidence of the long, wrong road that had brought him here. And she held it for a moment with the simple directness of a woman who has decided that the thing she is doing is the thing she is doing, no more architecture required. Then she let it go and said, "Help me finish the dishes." And he turned the water back on. The kitchen was warm and the dishes were ordinary, and the house around them was quiet, with Zara sleeping somewhere in it. And outside, the November Houston evening was doing whatever it did, mild and dark and vast in the specific way of a city that did not know how to be small. Jae-min stood at Aaliyah's kitchen sink and washed the dishes from a dinner made by his daughter from a recipe she had found online because she had wanted to make something that connected the two halves of where she came from. And beside him, Aaliyah dried each dish as he handed it to her without speaking. And the silence between them was the kind that did not require filling because it was already full. 6 months after that, on an evening in May, when the live oak in the front yard had gone fully green and Zara was in the yard, drawing something in chalk on the front walkway with a focused intensity that suggested a significant artistic undertaking, Jaemin sat down on the porch steps beside Aaliyah and said the thing he had been carrying for a long time in the patient way of a man who had learned, at significant cost and considerable delay, that the right moment was worth waiting for. He did not kneel. He did not produce anything. He simply turned to her and said what was true, that he had spent 11 years building a life that was structurally sound and completely empty, and that the 6 blocks between his house and hers were already too many, and that he did not want to spend whatever remained of his life approaching and stepping back from the thing he had been certain of since he was 29 years old. He asked her to marry him. Aaliyah looked at him. She looked at Zara in the yard, who had stopped drawing and was watching them with the precise, focused attention of someone who has been expecting a specific event and is monitoring for its arrival. She looked back at Jae-min. "You told her," she said. "She asked me what I was planning," he said. "She is very difficult to deflect." Aaliyah looked at her daughter again. Zara raised her eyebrows in a very specific expression that managed to convey both impatience and encouragement simultaneously, and was so completely, recognizably her that Aaliyah pressed her lips together against a smile. She looked at Jae-min. The evening was warm. The oak tree moved slightly in a small wind. Somewhere down the street, a dog was communicating something to the neighborhood in a voice too large for the message. The city went on in all directions, enormous and indifferent and full of 10,000 ordinary evenings happening simultaneously, and this was one of them. Yes, Aaliyah said. Zara, in the yard, made a sound of vindicated satisfaction and went back to her chalk drawing. Jamin looked at the woman beside him and understood, in the complete and unglamorous and entirely sufficient way, that understanding comes when it is real, not as a revelation but as an arrival, the end of a long route at the place you were always going. That the thing he had turned himself into a man incapable of feeling in order to survive had not, in the end, worked. He had felt it the entire time. He had simply been very far from home.